Hey guys, Steven here, and today I have something really exciting to show you. Just last night I was out there. I set up right here at home, and I was able to get lots of data for the Orion Nebula. Now, the Orion Nebula is a really fascinating target, and I'll explain why here in a few minutes. But let me just tell you, this thing is mind blowing as far as how much detail can be captured relatively easily. Because you see, I live in a Bortle 6 zone, right? And that usually means the fainter details of objects are much, much more difficult to capture just because of the fact that, well, the light pollution at that particular level washes a lot of the finer details out. So I kept my exposure times pretty minimal this time around. I didn't do any guiding or anything like that, so I just stuck with 1 minute exposures. And I wanted to do Orion Nebula since it's a target that I haven't done since like 2 years ago for one reason or another. As a matter of fact, it was my first ever target when I bought my DSLR camera back in 2020, at the end of that year. And I have to say, I've come a long way since then. I still have a long ways to go, I'm sure. But when I think back on just my very first pictures of Orion Nebula, even going back before that, when I actually took my first picture of it with my phone, as you can see here, there's not really a lot of detail. It honestly reminds me of like pictures I've seen of Orion that were taken back like in the 19th century or something. Like the very original Orion pictures that were done with really old time photography. But when I got my DSLR camera, that really brought things to a whole different level. For the first time, I was actually able to see Orion's main colors, the reddish, purplish hues that are all too familiar to those that have seen this fantastic object. Of course, there's greens, especially in the trapezium region of the nebula. And I'll explain more about that here in a little bit too, because that definitely played a role in the final editing process for my most recent image. But as you can see though, these are pretty rudimentary level images of this nebula. And I really wanted to try this again the following winter because obviously by the time I was able to get out there again in the spring of 2021, it was far too late. Orion was obviously getting, it was about to set. It was about to be disappearing from the evening sky, I should say. Um, I was also moving that year too, so I didn't really have any way of doing any meaningful photography during that time. So things were kind of put on hold for a little bit, but I definitely wanted to return to the Orion Nebula as my go-to target in the following winter. Of course, that time came and went, and well, that winter did come, and unfortunately, I just couldn't catch a break. The weather that last year was just extremely uncooperative for astrophotography. It was, you know, really cloudy that year, and at the time, I didn't really have a good remote setup yet where I can actually control things from inside the house. So really, it was out of the question. I just had no way of doing it last year, so I had to wait yet another year. So 2022 came and went, and here we are. This past winter, as you guys have, as I've said before already, if you listen to my previous video, it's been a pretty cloudy winter overall. Either cloudy or just busy. Life gets busy sometimes, but I finally, after so many months of waiting and just waiting for better, clear skies, um, I actually thought I lost my opportunity because on Friday I thought that was going to be my only clear night for quite some time, but it turns out I actually had yesterday evening as well, which was not supposed to be clear. Like the forecasters were all saying it was going to be increasing clouds over the course of the evening, but fortunately the clouds remained at bay, and I think it stayed clear pretty much the entire night. I mean, I was out there until midnight, and it was still clear skies. So it was that was definitely a godsend. Let me tell you that it was definitely a godsend that I was able to get anything at all last night, because the night before it was clear, but like I said, I was busy that evening. I had other plans. I didn't get home as early as I was hoping I would, so that was not going to happen. But so yeah, I got some good data of Orion. I was able to get, at the time, I got nearly an hour's worth of 1 minute subs. But of course, well, I wasn't guiding last night, so I knew that I probably was not going to be able to keep all my subs. Obviously, periodic error is an issue with most typical telescope, mounts that have tracking capabilities. Of course, I have an AVX mount, which is a computerized go-to mount that does track automatically. But of course, the gearing system in there can only take you so far. It's a good mount, but it has its limits, just like anything else does. So basically, with the focal length I was using, which was, I was using the native focal length of my 8SC telescope, which is about 2,000 millimeters, and then I slapped on a focal reducer that reduced it by 63%. So my effective focal length that I was using was around 1260 millimeters, which admittedly is pretty long for this type of target. Orion probably would fit better with probably at least half of that focal length, if not even more. But, I made it work. Okay, it did work out just fine. As you can see here, this image was a result of nearly 40 minutes of total exposure time. That was about how much I was able to salvage, which isn't too bad for getting nearly an hour's worth of data that I was able to use, nearly 40 minutes of it. That's about a 2/3 ratio, which means that my mount was handling 1 minute pretty, just fine, for the most part. It was enough to actually get meaningful data out of, and to be able to stack it with, of course, DeepSkyStacker, which is what I used for that purpose. And I did use a few dark frames. That's for calibration purposes, in case you're not aware. Obviously, our cameras have built-in noise in them, and you have to, take dark frames, meaning you basically take pictures with the camera, with the cap over the camera sensor, and essentially that the stacking software then will negate the noise that's introduced by the camera itself. So that's what I did. So what you're seeing here is a result of about 40 minutes of exposure, and I also, of course, edit it with the free version of Photoshop. I don't have a subscription for Photoshop. I just use whatever free version they have out there, which does the basics, and that's pretty much it. So this is a great image. As you can see, lots of detail compared to the one I got from 2 years ago. A lot more detail. I also use another software called SiriL. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but essentially I use that to essentially bring all my RGB levels in my data to the proper levels. Basically, it's they call it a histogram. Basically, I'm not a complete guru when it comes to understanding how all that works, but I do know that a histogram has to be stretched to the point that you're bringing out as much of the data as you can. So I used that tool essentially to auto stretch the histogram. And then I went back into Photoshop and went from there to edit it, do maybe some very minor cropping, and did a little bit of denoising, and voila, we have this image here. As you can see, pretty good. But this time I decided, you know, this nebula deserves a little bit of extra attention, because as you can see, I captured the outer areas, the outer gases of this nebula pretty nicely, given the circumstances, given that it's a Bortle 6 that I was shooting in and everything. It looks nice, but as you can see, the trapezium region, which is the brightest region of this particular nebula, is pretty overexposed. And as it turns out, you only need to capture maybe a couple of seconds of the trapezium area before it becomes overexposed. It doesn't take very long. So what I decided to do this time was try a technique that allowed me to essentially take a separate picture file of just the trapezium area, where I just did a brief 2-second exposure of just that region. And what I did was I used an online tool that allowed me to overlay that image on top of my main image that has, all the other detail on it. And this is the image that I came up with, as you can see here. Much better. Basically the same image as before, except now you can actually see the stars that are inside the trapezium region of this nebula. So we actually now can salvage the details that are actually there. The data is there. It's just all about bringing it out and representing it in the best way possible, which is what post-processing is all about. That is the other half of this hobby. It's one thing to get out there and set up and collect data, get all the picture files and everything. But it's another thing altogether to take that data and make something meaningful out of it that is accurately representative of the object that you're trying to capture. And that was what I sought to do here. Like I said, took some extra time with it, and this is the result that I came up with. This is by no means, I would not call this a professional quality image by any stretch. I've seen much, much better ones out there. Lots of great work out there to admire for sure, but I'm happy with this result. I would consider this to be my first ever for real image of the Orion Nebula, aka M42 and M43 in the Messier catalog. So there you have it. Was not the easiest thing to figure out for me, but I did managed to get essentially 2 images into one. And I hope that you found this video to be helpful, and I hope that you enjoy what I presented here today. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of this kind of content. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for watching, and until next time, clear skies and cheers.